Hello and welcome to this special broadcast that we are bringing to you in collaboration with Voice of America. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Now, the emergency health order that was used during the pandemic at the U.S.-Mexico border to quickly expel migrants back to Mexico or to their home countries has now ended. And Voice of America's immigration correspondent, Aline Barros, reports on as to how the situation at this moment is unfolding along the southern Texas border.
The future of migrants waiting in Mexico for a chance to cross into the United States is uncertain. As new immigration measures are being rolled out, questions arise. Title 42, a pandemic-era health measure, allowed for the quick expulsion of migrants back to Mexico or their home countries. Now, with its ending, migrants are confused about what to do next. The Biden administration announced new asylum restrictions, but people like Priscilla Horta, who is an immigration lawyer in Brownsville, Texas, have been crossing the border into Matamoros, Mexico every week to explain to migrants the process they're about to face.
If you enter under any other circumstance besides the app or at a pre-scheduled appointment, you will not be considered eligible for asylum, which, having worked day in and day out with people who are waiting, especially here in Matamoros, that is precisely what they're seeking, an opportunity to be heard for asylum.
Horta is advising migrants to use the CBP-1 app to secure an appointment and letting them know that if they cross without authorization, they will be removed immediately. But even with the extra 1,000 appointments available on the CBP-1 app, people are waiting for some time. Nerissa Ruas is a Cuban migrant waiting on the Mexican side with her husband and 2 small children.
The same. There is no space. We are desperate. We don't know what to do.
Ruas arrived in Matamoros a month ago and is still not sure when her family will be able to present themselves at a port of entry. She was an accountant in Cuba. If she crosses to the U.S., she has plans for the future.
Entrepreneur and to get ahead, to get my family ahead.
In Brownsville, an increase in migrant arrivals is not something new.
The reality is, you've got thousands, more than 1,000 or 2,000 coming over every day. So they only have so many staff that can process as many individuals as they can.
Trevino says communities along the border are preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best.
People keep talking about border security or implying that the border is insecure and not safe. And I would respectfully disagree with that. Just because we've had these surges in numbers of immigrants and migrants, that in and of itself has not created the border as an unsafe area. It's just created a situation that our immigration system is broken, and we've known that for more than 40 years, and yet administration or Congress after Congress continues to kick the can down saying, let somebody else deal with it because they don't want to deal with the political fallout.
For Border Patrol officials, the mission is clear. Process migrants who qualify under current asylum guidelines and quickly deport those who do not.
The border is not open, okay? If you enter between the ports of entry, you're entering the country illegally, okay? And you are subject to consequences. Another thing that's going to come with Title 8 are consequences. What I mean by that is that people are going to be removed, okay? It's no longer referred to as deportation, but it's a synonym, okay? People will be deported. They will be facing deportation with a ban of re-entry of 5 years.
For those who are able to make it to the U.S. side, the journey isn't over. Rosy Carrillo is asking for asylum. Her immigration court appointment is scheduled for May 2024. She is on her way to Atlanta.
I hope to eventually bring my children. I miss them so much. It's so hard to be separated from my family. And they're my only family, my mother, my 3 children. I have no one to help them, and if I don't work, they won't eat. My dream is to have them here.
U.S. immigration officials are urging migrants to use the CBP-1 app if they plan to ask for asylum. They say the next few days will be busy. Aline Barros, VOA News, Brownsville, Texas.
And also to give us more perspective in terms of what exactly is happening at this moment within the United States of America, we're being joined in by VOA's correspondent Jessica Stone, who's joining us live at this moment from the White House in Washington, D.C. Jessica, Title 42 has now expired, so how is the United States prepared for this moment?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we're going to continue to see the answer to that as minutes and days roll by here. But we do know that this week, President Biden did call Mexican President Manuel Obrador, talked him through the changes in enforcement policy that are taking place now that Title 42 has been lifted, because now U.S. immigration officials are functioning under Title 8, which has much stricter enforcement. For example, you cannot apply for asylum at the U.S. border if you have not already done so in Mexico. You also cannot come into the United States, be turned away, and then try to come in anytime for another 5 years. So last week, the Pentagon also agreed, as you know, to send 1,500 troops to the border to help with administrative tasks to try to alleviate some of the burden on Border Patrol officials. But local officials, like the local governors in Arizona and in Texas, they are not waiting for federal help. Both those governors, one a Democrat, one a Republican, have complained about what they feel is the lack of federal help. What we've seen is in Arizona, under that Democratic mayor, she's already organizing transportation for these immigrants. She's already organizing additional shelter paid for by the state and reserving the right to send the National Guard to the border, where Yuma, Arizona, a border town, says it's already seeing over 1,000 people coming through a day. And then meantime, in Texas, they've already deployed the National Guard to the border to basically turn people away from even crossing. So border governors are in real trouble. There's a sense that from people I've spoken to at Border Patrol that there isn't simply enough space, as Aline Barros reported, to put all of these people while they wait to be processed and while they wait to be adjudicated. Mohammed?
All right, very interesting. Do continue to stay on with this, because I want you to weigh in on another important story where the American Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said on Tuesday that Washington is looking to cooperate with China to solve certain big challenges. His remarks have come at a time when China is preparing to send an envoy to Ukraine for potential peace talks. Meanwhile, the United States is also providing Ukraine with about $1.2 billion in terms of military aid ahead of the expected spring offensive against Russia. The Voice of America's State Department Bureau Chief Nick Ching gets you more details.
Russian forces attacked Kyiv with a barrage of missiles hours before Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a speech at the Victory Day parade in Moscow's Red Square, accusing the West of waging a real war against Russia. In Washington, the Pentagon said the U.S. will provide Ukraine with $1.2 billion in military aid ahead of its expected spring offensive against Russia. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Right now, of course, the focus is on the Ukrainian efforts that we anticipate to try to retake more of the territory that's been seized from Ukraine by Russia over the last 14 plus months. My own estimation is that they have in place across all of those dimensions what they need to continue to be successful in regaining territory.
Next month, the UK will host the Ukraine Recovery Conference.
We will seek to build a coalition that will enable Ukraine to rebuild its country after this conflict has been concluded, after they regain their country back.
Blinken said the US and UK maintain a coordinated approach toward China, including looking for ways to solve big challenges. Ukraine's spring offensive against Russia may pave the way for negotiations by the end of the year, officials say. In Europe, officials said China could play a part.
China, as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, can play a significant role in ending the war if it chooses to do so.
Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang said Tuesday that China is preparing to send a peace envoy to Ukraine.
We will persist in promoting peace talks, and we will send the Chinese government special envoy for Eurasian affairs to visit Ukraine in the near future.
But one analyst is skeptical.
The Chinese are not neutral. They are not unbiased. They are clearly tilted, much tilted, toward Russia. the key caution is to be sure that any conversation with the Chinese about the Ukraine war, or the Russian war on Ukraine, has the Ukrainians as participants.
U.S. officials say there is a role for China to play in mediating peace talks, but such diplomatic efforts should be consistent with the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Nike Chin, VOA News, Washington.
And also Voice of America's Jessica Stone is still with us. Jessica, it seems that there is evidence of an attempt between Washington and Beijing to increase in-person engagement. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, and there's really a need, Mohammed Saleh, to have more of these in-person meetings, because not only do we have unresolved issues in the U.S. China relationship when it comes to that Chinese spy balloon, but the origins of COVID, and all of the increased engagement or lack of engagement between U.S. and Chinese businesses, additional regulations going on in China. So this week we had National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan meet with Wang Yi, the top Chinese diplomat in Europe. A readout of that provided by the White House indicated they did talk about the Russia-Ukraine war as well as U.S. China relations. And the White House says that it was a cordial and substantive conversation. Now, China is expected to send that envoy to Europe to start negotiating a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia in the coming days. And there have been other in-person meetings between U.S. and Chinese officials going on in the background. For example, the U.S. ambassador to China met with both the commerce and foreign ministers in Beijing. A diplomatic source tells VOA also that China's Minister of Commerce is expected to come here to Washington next week to meet with the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo. And Secretary Blinken also told reporters in recent days that he does expect to reschedule that visit that was canceled this year after the Chinese spy balloon incident back in the first part of this year. Mohammed?
All right, very interesting. Now, and also the fact that the Russian and the Ukrainian spring counteroffensive could, of course, start pretty much any day. That is what is expected. So how do these, efforts for peace negotiations fit in with the possibility of these counteroffensives being launched?
Well, from the position of the NATO countries, what we understand is this. They will continue to send arms and military aid to Ukraine to give them the upper hand on the battlefield in order to strengthen their negotiating position in those anticipated peace talks. So, for example, we mentioned this approved U.S. $1.2 billion in military aid this week. That's going to include air defense systems, counter-drone systems, artillery and satellite imagery systems as well. And the U.K., meantime, has announced this week they're sending long-range cruise missiles capable of even reaching Crimea, of course, the territory that Russia took from Ukraine in 2014. These are the so-called Storm Shadow missiles. They have a range of 250 kilometers, so they are on their way to Ukraine, though the timing is still unclear as to when these spring offensives will happen. For example, this week, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said it's not yet time to launch Ukraine's counteroffensive. He says he is still waiting for more training and more weapons. Mohammed?
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Jessica Stone, for joining us and getting us all those details there.